I'd like to call my board member, Ms. Mildred Mutesa, who is a board member of the African Union for Housing Finance and also the CEO of Zambia National Building Society. And she is the chairperson of the Lobbying and Advocacy Committee at the AUHF. And she's going to moderate a discussion with Lexton Kwanda, the Director for Rural Housing Zimbabwe, and David Chanda, the Principal Economist with the Ministry of Infrastructure, Housing and Urban Development in Zambia. We will start with a presentation from Zambia, from David Chanda, and then we'll carry on to a presentation from Zimbabwe, from Lexton Kwanda. And what we're really looking here is how are governments thinking about green? How are they integrating green principles within the framework of their effort and focus on affordable housing? So can I please call Mr. Chanda, please, to the stage? Lovely.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Cairo. I don't know about you, but coming from the airport, if it's the first time you're visiting, you feel like you're going to see the pyramids all the way to the hotel. And I'm still waiting for that moment. So the panel will be looking at applying policy levers to support sustainable and affordable housing and considerations from Southern Africa. As the chairperson of the Lobbying and Advocacy Committee, we're very passionate about working with governments across Africa to see what policies need to change for us to be able to deliver real affordable housing, and affordable housing in the context of the various countries. So we have a presentation from Zambia. Unfortunately, we're running over time, so perhaps if you can just compress your presentation to speak to just the salient points for not more than 7 minutes, and then our delegate from Zimbabwe will also give a presentation.
Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to speak here. My name is David Chanda, as already introduced, from Zambia, Ministry of Infrastructure, Housing and Urban Development. So I'll go straight into the presentation since we are behind schedule. That's just a small picture of the headquarters of the ministry. That's our mission to facilitate housing development in the country, but also public infrastructure to drive socio-economic development in the country. So delivery of sustainable, affordable, I put decent housing there as well because I think it has to be sustainable, yes. It has to be affordable, but it also has to be decent. So my understanding of sustainable is that it goes both ways. It's, of course, green, but also we have to make sure that we sustain it over some time. Then it has to be on a massive scale. And so issues of decency in this case, I thought it has to include basic amenities, clean water, hygienic toilets and bathrooms, defined cooking areas and living areas and so on. Then affordable, I already touched on that a bit. I think as we discuss, we'll be able to share more insights into some things that the government in Zambia is doing. Yes, so far, government has made some strides in terms of delivering decent housing in different sectors of our economy. One thing is that our ministry, on one hand, delivers actual housing, but also facilitates. In terms of delivering actual housing, public housing, we do it for various government departments. That is a project that was completed 2011-2012 for the Ministry of Defense, 4,570 prefabricated houses. That just shows briefly the construction period of the prefab houses. That's also another angle of that picture. Then we have completed in 2019 2,170 housing units for the Home Affairs Department. That includes the police and so on. Then in the recent past, government also designated new districts because some areas were too big and development was urged to take to certain places because of their very large scale. And so in new districts, there's also a number of medium, low cost, and a few of high cost houses that we're doing, totaling 1,386. And also in 2019, we completed 900 housing units for the Kala Camp. That's also under Ministry of Defense. That's part of the picture. This is an ongoing project in Lusaka. It's called Buffalo Park. It's also for the Ministry of Defense. We also do for Ministry of Health and also other sectors. So I'll go on to challenges of sustainable delivery of mass and decent housing in Zambia. I think part of the challenge is what Professor touched on, issues of services. I think they have been lacking for some time, and so you find that development is happening in areas where the roads are not there, electricity is not there, water services are not there. So through various strategies, we are trying to address that challenge through proper coordination between the bulk service providers and the housing development, with government playing a facilitatory role. That's part of the challenge, which I just alluded to, the lack of coordination between developers and service providers early in the planning and implementation of the project. So we've identified that and addressing that through various initiatives. I'm sure as we discuss, we'll share more on that. So recommendations on going forward, we need proper coordination among developers, service providers, and local authorities at the early stages of housing development. Then, of course, with regards to environmental sustainability, we need to start looking at mass housing of multi-story apartments. I'm concluding just a minute. Of mass housing development, I think, like Professor mentioned, we are used to having too much space to ourselves. There's a little bit of inertia for people to occupy high-rise buildings. So, is my time up? Okay. Okay. So those are some of the issues. We have a program on local building materials and promotion of technology. So those are some of the source-stabilized blocks that we promote, and we empower different sectors in our country to use local building materials, including on drainages. We promote the use of, for instance, stones instead of just relying on brick and mortar. So that's some of the interventions we're making, and that's some of the outcomes through using local building materials and also promoting local technologies. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Morning to all. I'm LT Kwanda from the Government of Zimbabwe, Director Rural Housing. I'm going to take you through to what we are doing in terms of provision of low-cost housing in Zimbabwe. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, basically that shows the country's population for the interest of those who would want to invest. Necessarily, we are around 16 million, so to speak. We are, like most Southern African countries, coming from a background where we are a former colony of the British system. Initiatives that we have done after independence as we moved to empower housing in terms of low-cost housing and attendant ways of trying to get financing are in order there. Under post-independence, this is where we are beginning to talk of real thrust towards creating housing for the generality of the population. We're looking at those areas covering the finances, the land provision, and related infrastructure that goes with it. These are housing schemes that the ministry has tried to put in place so that we can address issues pertinent to the provision of low-cost housing in the country. Then the period 2012 to 2017, these are some of those initiatives, but allow me to move forward to the current, where we are really doing something to ensure that we are tracking towards our national housing policy, or the national vision, which would take us to 2030 in terms of raising the country's economic status to a medium income economy. We have a new human settlements policy, which has certain intrinsic ingredients that allows our partners, the private sector, to assist us in placing infrastructure relevant to housing provision. Thus, information relating to housing contribution by the various members within our economic setup as housing delivery. You see the local authorities, their chunk there. You see what government contribution is there. You see what the banks are doing for us in the name of cooperation between the banks, government, and the private sector. Thus, pictorially, what is there. Current government-funded housing projects, I hope my time is still there a bit. We have all this in terms of our strategy of densification, vertical space utilization to be precise, where we are saying land is an infinite resource, and as such we have to utilize that horizontal and vertical space for maximization of getting the throughput through to those who, as of right, require that nourishment. These are some of the projects that we are doing. You can see these are densified in nature. These are some of projects in Harare and elsewhere. Moving on, I'm just showing you what we are doing. We are also susceptible to what the professor was talking about, flooding, climate change-induced calamities, This is part of our rural hinterland, but we are making avenues to address it. I will skip projects under rural development, but they're still low-cost housing. These are some of designs that we are coming up with. Now, in terms of private sector housing projects, in line with government's adopted strategy to incorporate the private sector, this is what we are doing. If you see the picture on the to my right, we are talking of emplacement of geysers to any new housing estate which is being started. To the right, we are also talking, like the professor described, greening the environment. That's a project by one of big developers in Harare. That's Moderator housing. That's Arlington. Arlington, those who are familiar with the Harare, as we go to our airport. Again, we are just depicting what we are doing. This is the Moderator. Now, in terms of...
Sorry, we have 1 minute.
1 minute, okay. We have a problem in informal settlements in the country. So these are some of opportunities that investors can move into as we try to regularize. Investment opportunities, I think you can just pick through. My angle is a bit... I would want to thank you for your patient listening. Thank you.
So thank you so much. Very elaborate presentations coming from Mr. David Mulenga Chanda, who's representing the Ministry of Infrastructure, Housing and Urban Development in Zambia, and the just ended presentation from Mr. Lexton Kawanda, who is Director, Rural Housing Zimbabwe, but also representing the Ministry of Housing in Zimbabwe. So welcome to the panel. Perhaps you can just pick up your mics. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. We have a lot of developers in the room, a lot of private players in the room. And I think most of the discussions we've been having are around how policy may be improved to support the affordable housing agenda. So perhaps just to start off with Mr. Lexton Kawanda from Zimbabwe, what specific policies is the government of the Republic of Zimbabwe actually implementing to support affordable housing, with emphasis on greening affordable housing as well?
Thank you. As government, we are a bit financially constrained given the demands, competing demands to nourish the economy, to the extent that our valuable asset is the land. So we are trying to motivate those who would want to venture into low-cost housing by providing land at intrinsic value to reduce the end cost of the unit so that those in need can afford the unit cost.
All right, and I think there was something that was very, that we've seen across Africa. We have one of our members where government has actually been subsidizing the cost of money. Governments have been, we've seen in some areas where government comes in to support the bulk infrastructure. Are there any such policies within Zimbabwe that are being implemented to support housing in Zimbabwe?
Yeah, in terms of greening, yes. Architectural and engineering designs from our experts, they have to be alive to issues relating to the whole climate change issues, to the extent that it is now mandatory for any new housing estate being developed to carry on intrinsic gadgets that speak to this requirement.
And in Zambia, how is government working with private sector to deliver affordable housing? One of the things that we look at as a lobbying and advocacy committee is to bring government on board in terms of the conversation around affordable housing. Is there anything in Zambia that government is doing with private sector to further this cause?
Thank you for the question. Yes, there are several issues, several interventions that the government is making. Similar to what my colleague from Zimbabwe said, we are using land as equity. So we know that one of the biggest cost drivers in delivering affordable, sustainable housing is at the cost of land. So we are bringing land as equity. Then the other part is because the investors, if it's a private investor, they would want to know that once they develop such houses, the off-takers are ready. So through our Public Service Management Division at Cabinet Office, we also get to aggregate the housing need and those who want houses. So for instance, if a developer is coming with the expression of interest to develop, for example, 5,000 houses, then the government is going to come in and make sure that we have those 5,000 available off-takers, even as the project is about to start. Then we can go on to discussing how they get to acquire such houses, through what modalities, with government helping in terms of salary deductions and from the housing allowances and so on. So that's one of the issues, and the other one is that we are in the process of developing a National Housing Development Fund, which will also benefit private developers. Thank you.
That sounds like something big. Maybe perhaps you can speak to us more about the initiative around the National Housing Development Fund and how that will go towards reducing the cost of housing. And I think perhaps we have other regions we've seen in Tanzania where the government has supported through the World Bank funds that have actually been dispersed to the housing sector to reduce the cost of finance. Perhaps you can speak to us around how that fund would work, and perhaps other jurisdictions may be interested.
Thank you. So the Housing Development Fund, the birth of it comes from actually the National Housing Policy in Zambia, which was launched in 2020. So it's 2020 to 2024, that housing policy. So it comes as a result of the realization that one of the biggest constraints to housing, affordable housing delivery on a massive scale is affordable but also adequate financing. So financing may be affordable, but it's not adequate to deliver tens of thousands of housing. So the fund was proposing the policy, and one of the things in a nutshell is that the National Housing Development Fund is going to develop, is going to benefit the wholesale beneficiaries. For instance, our Zambia National Housing, Zambia National Building Society, National Housing Authority, which is the implementing agency for the Ministry of Infrastructure, Housing and Urban Development. And through our wholesale beneficiaries, those institutions, then there will be retail beneficiaries, which will be private developers and other contributing institutions. But also, we do not want to leave out the social aspect of housing. So from the fund, the ministry would also be able to access such funding in collaboration with the ministry responsible for social welfare issues to develop housing. You may wish to note that Zambia has a program on development of, for instance, homes for the aged and for the extremely poor. So that's part of the issues, although that will be like, I think, 10% of allocation from the Housing Development Fund.
Wonderful. Maybe just going back to Zimbabwe, I had a discussion not so long ago with members from the World Bank, and one thing that most developers will tell you is the affordable housing fell on the premise of greenfield projects not having bulk infrastructure supported by government. What is the government of Zimbabwe doing about providing bulk infrastructure for greenfield projects to allow developers to go in and actually build an affordable house?
Thank you for that question. It's a big challenge within the country. I would say off-site bulk services are the albatross around the neck of pace development of housing estates in the country. I can give an example. In our current capital, Harare, you cannot emplace 10,000 new structures without upgrading the treatment works for water and sewer. I am also coming from the perspective where we used to get financial assistance from the World Bank, EBEN 1, EBEN 2, in the 90s, which would primarily backstop infrastructure provision. But as you are all aware, with the sanctions that have been imposed on the country, we are not in a position to access that kind of infrastructure, that kind of financing as of now. I must also want to add, to add on to what my colleague has talked in terms of further ensuring that government provides for the lower end of our citizens. We also equally have what we call our National Housing Fund, which fund also within itself comprises what we call a housing and guarantee fund, wherein civil servants, government employees can access a guarantee to the magnitude of 100% when they would want to get a mortgage from our financial institutions. It provides ordinary citizens with up to 90% where they would also want to equally access housing finance from a financial institution. But having said that, that issue of bulk infrastructure is a big problem.
All right, perhaps just in conclusion, if each of you can just briefly share with us what your governments in your jurisdictions are doing to further the green agenda, especially that housing is one of the contributors to climate change. I think the presentation from the professor cannot emphasize, the amount of, emissions and, negative consequences that come with not thinking green as we're setting up the housing developments. So perhaps you can just summarize what your governments are doing in as far as greening the housing projects that you're actually doing in your countries, and perhaps any opportunities that may exist for developers that are in this room that may be thinking of coming to Zimbabwe and perhaps Zambia.
For us in Zimbabwe, it's actually legislated to say for all new areas coming up, besides the need to utilization of solar energy to replace geysers and related high energy consuming gadgets, we are saying designs, even from an architectural or engineering design point of view, they have to be alive to imperatives of being compliant. That's a major one. Or we are also talking about smart cities in Zimbabwe. I'm sure some of our colleagues may be aware that we are also coming up with a new city like our colleagues in Egypt, where everything is going to be green, everything is going to be smart in terms of transportation, light rail, walkways, which will not lead to congestion, and related aspects of that constitutes a smart city.
Thank you so much. And your closing remarks?
Thank you so much. So in terms of what government is doing and what opportunities exist for possible private investors, which we are really looking forward to in Zambia, we have over 1.5 million deficit, and this will go to over 3.3 million by 2030. Some of the interventions, massive housing development that was supposed to happen, hasn't happened due to some of issues we've highlighted, issues of adequacy and the cost of financing. On the side of government, some of the things that are being done is that we are reviewing and developing. We are at a very advanced stage. This has been submitted to Cabinet Office. The review of housing regulations development to put into to make sure that it's in line with the climate change policy and all the positive developments in green technology. For instance, asbestos roofing, you cannot use that. That is coming out very clearly, and also other issues. Then we have a program at the ministry which is called Promotion of Local Building Materials and Technologies. Like Professor mentioned, we need to develop housing that just doesn't fit the Western conception of housing, but also that fits into not just the cultural aspect of different African societies, but also into that fits into the pocket of the African societies. So that's some of like the soil stabilized blocks I showed earlier. And this is not just done by the ministry alone, it's also being done in collaboration with the University of Zambia, Technology Development and Research Institute there. So we have developed some of these houses in different rural areas and in Lusaka as model houses, where the government buys these building materials. We give technical support to these cooperatives to develop. Thirdly, we are reviewing the Public-Private Partnership Act. It's just 2 more, I'll be finished. The Public-Private Partnership Act, to just bring it to speed to some of the gaps that have been identified and that seem to constrain investment in housing development. Then, of course, the issue of land. We are really driving to push the cost of housing down by using land as equity in collaboration with the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources, and also with traditional leaders, because some of the land falls on customary land. So the ministry is able to facilitate such land if private developers come with a viable project. And finally, we have various initiatives which, for instance, include the Housing Development Fund, and once that is fully operational, then developers can also come and benefit from it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's Mr. David Mulenga Chanda from the Ministry of Infrastructure, Housing and Urban Development, Zambia, and Mr. Laxton T. Kuanda from the Ministry of Housing in Zimbabwe, representing the Honourable Minister. As a Lobbying and Advocacy Committee, we're so grateful that you could join us in Cairo, and we look forward to more government participation from across the country. We're so delighted to have Honourable Minister from Gabon. Unfortunately, he speaks French, and I do not. We look forward to having an interpreter, so we could have you on the panel as well. So thank you so much, and if there are any developers that are looking to invest in Zimbabwe or Zambia, please feel free during the break time to reach out to both. I'm sure they'll be very happy to speak with you. Thank you so much.